I'm going to then talk about what might be a relational approach to finance. In one sense, finance is inherently relational. It's transferring capital and finance between parties. Credit, the word credit derives from the Latin for trust, credo. And when thinking about relational finance in the biblical context, you have to understand that Jesus' teaching is based on the idea that love, the quality of relationship of love between love of man for God and man for neighbor, are the most important things that make life have meaning. We have nothing without those. They are the greatest commandments. Jesus also teaches that our most dangerous temptation is to worship mammon, worship money, worship resources as a god, as our source of meaning in life. So with that backdrop, how does the Bible think about debt and interest? Well, first of all, it's very clear that debts have to be repaid. There is a promise that goes on, and hence biblical teaching is very firm that debt should be repaid, and that's an obligation of the borrower. However, interest-free lending is encouraged in numerous places in the Bible, in biblical law. This is something that is positive and reinforcing of good relationships. And you know this as well as I do. If you go to your neighbor and ask to borrow a cup of sugar and it's lent to you, this is a relationally positive thing. However, there is intended freedom from debt. In this instance, the most important verse in Scripture is Proverbs 22:8. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave of the lender. Because the borrower has given their word, given an oath, a promise to repay, they are no longer free. And so effectively, debt is bondage. It is no surprise that in English, bond and bondage are linked. I've given my bond. I am indebted. I am enslaved in one sense. I'm a servant. However, Scripture is very clear that that's not the intention. Although it encourages interest-free lending, you shouldn't be in debt for very long, and certainly not for your life. So there were various institutions in the Old Testament for how to get people out of debt. So, for instance, if you had a wealthy relative, they had an obligation to buy you out of debt, to mortgage back your house. But if that didn't work, every 6 years, every 7 years, 6 years in maximum debt, there was a year of debt cancellation, so that debt slaves were freed and the slate was wiped clean. Why would anyone lend? You only lend in those circumstances when you know somebody well, or you're going to get some other benefit from that process. Then Scripture is very clear that interest is to be prohibited, particularly within those you count as fellow countrymen. And this is taught throughout both Old and New Testaments. And I'm happy to debate with anyone who would say otherwise. Inherently, you know that if debt is servitude, then profiting from the servitude of another must be inherently wrong. Going back to borrowing your cup of sugar, if your neighbor charged you 2 cups of sugar for the one you borrowed, you know that that's unneighborly, that's inherently wrong. And so throughout church history, as I said, up until the 17th century, this was very clear. Nobody really doubted this idea that indebting others for a profit was inherently wrong. That doesn't mean to say that we were meant to be in a socialist utopia or a Marxist state where the return on capital was not meant to be there. As we mentioned, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are in this middle ground where they have a problem with interest-based debt, but a return on capital, be it rental or equity, is appropriate, so long as this is rewarding stewardship and ownership of the underlying capital.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.